Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolo Grasso, and I'm joined today by my good friend, my favorite political conversationalist to have on this show from Fio Condutor, Rafael Félix. How are you doing, Rafael? Have you read anything good recently?
I've been reading very nice things. Actually, most of them homework for this same podcast.
Hey,
So yeah, I've been working hard for these people.
yeah, no, I'm happy to have you on board for this episode, special episode, maybe a heavy episode for sure. Once again, not an easy conversation that we're going to have in terms of content, because the last time we talked was a couple of weeks ago where we discussed the zone of interest, Martin Amis and Jonathan Glazer, and today we are staying in the realm of totalitarianism, fascism, disturbing ties to the present we're living in because today we're
Very
talking
topical.
about very Jesus, very topical. Because today we're talking about the Wall short story collections of Jean-Paul Sartre that includes Childhood of a Leader, which was adapted in 2015 by Brady Corbet.
Don't peddle your way back now. You wrote that the human race was unimportant.
What before? All I said was that this happened before and it will continue to happen again and again.
Nothing like this has ever happened before. Come on. We're still counting the dead.
Please don't miss my point on purpose. This kind of brutality can be pursued back to biblical times. And what I said in my article was not that the rest of the human race is unimportant. I only stated that, above all, it is the self that mustn't be betrayed.
Well, let's look at the Bible then. I suppose one could say that Pontius Pilate did not betray himself.
Well, that is certainly a banal illustration, and one that most scholars would surely disagree with. But all right. The tragedy is not only that Pontius Pilate betrayed himself, but the hundreds in the crowd before him did betray themselves. And that's what I wrote was the tragedy of war. Not that one man has the courage to be evil, but that so many have not the courage to be good.
So, Rafael, why don't you tell me how you felt about reading not so much just Childhood of a Leader, but I know you read some other stories from this collection by Jean-Paul Sartre, released in 1939. It is basically the father of existentialism, this way of thinking about what does it mean to be human, what is a person, what is one's like, own identity, how can one discover such things about themselves, will one ever discover them? How did you feel about the Wall and this collection of short stories leading up to the Childhood of a Leader?
Yeah, compared to Childhood of there's five stories I think in the Wall. I've read three of them. So the Wall, Eros Traços, I think that's the name, and Childhood of a Leader. Actually, the first I've read Child of a Leader first, and then I got to the other two for by your recommendation. They were very good, but I think the compared to Child of a Leader, not only they're shorter, of course, but they are much more contained. Child of a Leader is much deeper and delves on a much longer stretch of time than the other two stories, which are actual short stories. This one is still short, but it's like 80 pages still.
Basically a novella, we could
Yeah,
say.
so it's bulky for a short story. Let's put it like that. Um, and yeah, it's very much as you said a tale of existentialism and identity, but most of all was also very scary. The way it puts the way they if you are too aware of your own existence, you are deemed to absolute misery, which I found very sad, depressing, and quite true. In a way, we are living in an age of in which the word that always comes to mind in pretty much every topic of conversation that covers psychology, the way we feel, is that self awareness. the way that we feel aware of our own existence and our place in the world, and if we are actually in place or not. So it's a much if we uh, uh, if we are as aware of our place in a world, we are doomed to fail to find a place for us. Everything seems way too vast, way too big, way too many options, and it's the other side of the ignorance is bliss. So this is the other side of the coin, which is you are so aware of your own existence that you come to conclusions, as Sartre does at some points, where the character says, "I do not exist," which I found very, very, very scary.
Yeah, it's a disturbing collection to say the least. It is something that I was not expecting going into it. I'm aware of Sartre's a body of work and theories, just generally speaking, but this was my first time, similarly to you, actually reading his writing. One of only two fiction collections as well that he has read, fiction works rather. And the build up to Childhood of a Leader is interesting because you have these other short stories that are all from one extent to another about identity, about the self. Second one that you read, I'm gonna butcher it because it's the
Yeah, I think it's Erostratus. I think that's pretty sure it is.
Erostratus. Yes, yes, correct. Erostratus, maybe. Who knows? Um, that one was very upsetting in a way because you're essentially reading the inner thoughts of a very, very deranged and dangerous individual. And Childhood of a Leader is this culmination of all these stories because it's like you said, it's not contained in just like one event, one thing that's happening, one single person in a short amount of time, but it's actually decades spanning. Basically, we're following this young French boy, Lucien Fleury, from age 4 to age 18, 20, around the time he goes to college, you can say, to l'université in Paris. And while it's not written in first person, it is pretty much an introspective novella, short story. And like you said, it is very unsettling. Very unsettling because you can see how, in a different environment, through different either upbringing or connections or I don't know, just ways of living, he could have turned out to be someone decent. He could have found maybe a higher calling in life. Um, but instead, you see this evolution of this kid who already, first of all, just there's some interesting questions about sexuality and gender in here because when he's young, he keeps being mistaken for a girl. There are some events we'll get into later that tackle homosexuality and pederasty and very disturbing elements like that. But you do see how he is looking for answers. He's looking for meaning, and ultimately he finds it in the worst place possible. How did you feel about this character of Fleur? More so like Lucien's journey. Did you ever feel some sympathy for him? Maybe he's very very creepy kid, like you said at first. Um,
It's a slow, 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 slow burn in the sense that you feel that everything is going. Every page feels like something is about to go wrong. I found very interesting the writing of Sartre because it was not what I expected at all. It was much simpler than I expected it to be. Simpler in the language used, it's very direct. It's not. It's interesting that it made a book mostly about existentialism, but the book has so little reflections on it. It's just characters thinking about themselves. There's no statement in any of the short stories. I feel you just have characters trying to figure out their place in the world and what they essentially are. there's a lot of discussions during the short story about gender, as you said. It keeps being mistaken by a girl, and he often reflects of what does that mean, and maybe you like this or not. Even the first like 2 or 3 pages, you are not absolutely sure he's a boy. At least I found that in the first pages. It took me a bit to actually catch up to that because it was not super clear. And as you said, since it's not on first person, it feels very personal. It feels like you are in the boy's head, which also happened in the other two short stories that I've read. That I think they follow the same position. So it's not first person, but it's very introspectional at least. But it's a very scary character. I think kids can be very, very, very scary. They are a trope
Through that.
in horror films for a reason. They can be very creepy, exactly because they have no moral compass. There is nothing there to actually move them in the world. That is the actual work of nurture. We get back to maybe one of the biggest questions, both in book and film, which is the very old question of nurture versus nature. You know my position on it because, well, I'm studying sociology, so it'd be stupid if it would be nature. However, this both the book and the film, they make some interesting discussions of it without doing very much. I think it's the lack of moments, mostly actually in the film. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but maybe it's the lack of moments, like big dramatic moments, that tells you a little bit about that. But on the book itself, it's slightly episodic, and you feel like every episode is turning this boy into what he will ultimately be. And it's a very scary kid turning into a very scary adult.
Totally. It is kind of like this constant growth and change from him thinking like I don't exist, none of this is any meaning, none of this matters. He feels like it's not so much that he feels ostracized, um, but he alienates himself from other people because of some complexities. That's the term that he discovers. Like, I have complexities. I have these weird emotions and feelings
He seeks
toward,
psychology then, and it's a whole
yeah,
thing
Freud,
about, yeah,
Freud
yeah,
at
of course, it's
the
a whole
height of
thing.
psychoanalysis, and he looks for guidance. And the entire stretch of the book where he meets, I think it's called Berger,
Yep.
this
The
um
other boy,
yeah, there's
or
the boy is called Berliak. They all sound
yes,
very
yes, they're
uh,
all bees. They're very bees, but it's Berliak is the boy, Berger is the adult, the pederast, I think.
the
Maybe.
pederast. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That entire portion, I, I don't want to say that I found the book to be shocking. I was surprised by is how direct it is with
It's very cold. It's straight to the
yes,
point, very direct. Scary.
yes, like even having read other books, not from like 1949, but even earlier ones, they're always implying things, keeping them. And the moment Berger is introduced, and he's already talking about like, oh, the Greeks and Aristotle, they were paras, but like some of these authors, they're hated now, but that's the reason of the beauty of their heart. Which reminds me of so many conversations that we've had with other critics or film fans or book lovers, whatever, who find very weird excuses for people's genius. They're like, yeah, they were pedophiles, but that's part of the charm. That's why they're great artists. Um, but in that moment, I was expecting for things to go bad. Like you were saying, like the more you read this book, the more you expect things to go wrong, and they do. But again, I was not expecting for Sartre to tackle this relationship, the grooming, and all of that in such a cold, clinical, almost honest way. I also know, like, we need to acknowledge that Sartre himself was not the least controversial person around. He was in this
It's very French.
very French, very French. With Simone de Beauvoir, they were partners. They had open relationships. Again, allegedly, there was grooming on their part with students that they had in uni. So I may be part of the accuracy and details of this encounter, especially when they go together back to the motel where Berger is really trying to have a sexual relationship with this 15-year-old kid, 16,
I
14,
don't.
maybe even.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's that old actually.
Definitely underage. Like
Yes.
not like, oh, almost 18. It's no Call Me by Your Name. Um but it all kind of culminates in him finding, his true calling, because the whole setup basically is that in the beginning he knows that he will take over his father's business. He works in a factory. He owns a lot. I mean, he owns a factory that employs a lot of workers. And there is also this element of Marxism from the part of Sartre, which he always employed in his writing, as I was reading up on him, or just supporting workers and whatnot. So from seeing this story play out from the perspective of a very privileged kid of middle upper class French society, between the end of World War One and the beginning of World War Two, because we're still talking about 1939 by the time the novel ends. Like the conflict was basically just about to start. Um, it's 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 predestined for Lucien, for Fleurier, to take over all of this. And so the novel is leading up to him learning how to be this leader of sorts, which plays into the title of the novella. And how does he find power? How does he find strength, confidence? By being racist, by being misogynist, by manipulating the women around him, and by being deeply, deeply anti Semitic in a way that he gets applauded and lauded for. And that's where he starts seeing true power. How did you feel about this last stretch of the story?
Yeah, I think that part of the book comes not shocking, but it does come a bit out of nowhere. Mostly because everything that you see through this book is taken in such, as you said, very clinical, very at times simplistic, not in a bad way, but sometimes a simplistic way of looking at that stuff. Because we need to be reminded we are being put on the shoes of a boy, which at the point of the book says, "I do not exist. Nothing matters." The thing is, most of the things in the book don't matter to him. Even when we get to the racism, the anti-Semitism, the misogyny of it, he doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
He is only copying. It's a very it's a discussion we can have on the final stretch of the book of how honest the even the character that is speaking is being. So does he actually believe everything that he's saying? Because at no point in this book or in this short story do we have anything from him that resembles conviction. Everything he thinks or everything that is actually employing mentally is being ditched 3 or 4 pages afterwards. The whole pedicerian thing, it's or as we should be calling it, because that's the way that he puts it, but it's very much pedophilia. But when you get to that part, uh, what he says is that it actually doesn't hurt that much. I don't care very much about this, and now I'm bored. It's always this position of, something, he gets bored of it. There's no conviction on it. Maybe he found a place in that, in the hate, but how convicted, how it has any sort of conviction besides the this is slightly fun, this is I have a place to be, but I don't care if it's evil or not because it's just fun for people to actually like you. And I think it's more that it's someone that is desperate for people to like them. It's a call for attention, which also again very topic at this moment.
He's always looking for attention, right?
Yes,
Like he's
that is
he's
very much
always
it.
every time he meets someone, he
He
wants
wants
to
to
be accepted
impress.
by them. He wants to impress,
Exactly.
and then it's like, oh wait a second, I've changed my mind. I found someone else to focus on. I found another
Yeah.
object of attention. Even
Is it
there's
boring?
this other part where he starts to fall in love with the daughter. I have the name written down.
Yeah.
Berth,
Hmm.
who's a daughter of his father's worker, where there is attraction between them, but it's not so much just romantic attraction. But since this happens after the um, relationship, I hate the term, but his relationship with Berger, is trying almost to fight back against his potential latent homosexuality. So it's like, I'd like to be with her and better, but also, but I don't want to betray my purity of some sorts, and um,
It's a
just
very sleazy
social
and
element as well. Of like, she's lower class, she's the daughter of a worker.
it's a very uncomfortable bit. All of that conversation that they have in the kitchen, and that it turns slightly weirdly. I don't know if the word is sexual even, because it's much more than that. It's a power play that it's
Mm,
being done there. You said you push the light. The whole thing in Sartre and Marxism, and I think it's very clear in this. But that whole segment, it did feel like the character once again trying something new because he doesn't know what he likes and he doesn't know what he wants. So it just picks up and does. But once again, we're talking about a character that does not have a moral compass. So he does just behave in such an erratic way, in such a simplistic and cruel way at some points, and cold way. That that whole segment that has some sort of vibration to it, because you do feel in the writing that the girl actually has something, does feel something for him. He
yeah,
talks once again. She looks up to him. It's once again that the point that he wants to be impressive.
adulation.
Mm, yes, the adulation of it. So even in this more tender sexual kind of moments, we have that again with the kind of girlfriend. Um, and yeah, every interaction in this book is about both identity and power, most of them, and he struggles to find both.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want to say that he's mostly a passive player throughout the book, but he kind of is, which is why it feels like at the end when he actually becomes more and more aggressive, and more violent towards the Jewish population, especially. That's when he starts seeing positive feedback from the people surrounding him, where he sees them being these militant fascists who are against acceptance, who are against opening up to other people, but actually they're in favor of, closing things down, living in their own bubble, protecting the chastity of some way of like the true French people. And yeah, it turns into him becoming this little fascist asshole um, at the end, which I was expecting. And then we'll get, actually, I want to talk about the movie as well after this, because I did watch the movie years ago, so I already knew what was going to happen in that story. I was not expecting for this book to go as in depth into the character of Lucien, and to end on this note, very
Yeah,
dark
the
note.
note is very clear, like very very. It's almost like a wink, which I found very off-putting in a good
For
way.
1939,
The
especially.
to end the short story like this in 1939 by saying, "Hmm, I think I'll grow a mustache." It's like, oh no, oh no.
Like, yeah, you could play the if you were to adapt the story as is, you could play the Curb Your Enthusiasm scene at the end.
Yeah.
And he walks away. Maybe sees like a mustache reflection on a window.
Yes, I actually when I read the book, I was actually picturing that.
It's like, this would look good on me. You know?
Um,
Which is kind of like disturbing. I was reading up. Don't quote me on this, but if I read correctly, on Sartre's biography, when the Nazi occupation happened in France, he actually was forced to take over teaching jobs of Jewish professors that were kicked off. So, and this is, I want to say, 1940 to 1941 when that happened. So it is interesting that he got away with this story, which is again like, I think it's easy to generalize in a way. That's kind of like what Corbet does in the film that we'll talk about. It's kind of like taking this story outside of its roots, but it is at the end of the day still like a French narrative. It's not. It would be. It would feel very different if it were set in, like Berlin, 1939. Like if it were a German or even Austrian narrative. It is French. It is recognizing that the seeds of this evil are not so much coming from outside, or not just from outside, but also from within, right? Or at least maybe I'm
no,
overlooking,
no, no.
overreading
I
it.
think that's complete. I think that's completely accurate. Even looking at the film, yes, there is of course a background to it, but you could place it pretty much anywhere. Even if you trade the treaty that we're talking about in the film and put it on a different context or a different place, I don't think it would matter. I think the film is a much more family-ish driven part of it more than this one. This is more very introspective, very someone trying again to impress, to find a place. And it does tell you that the once again putting this back on how topical this is, this character, which absolutely lacks any kind of conviction at any point of the story, um, finds a place common to other people, just around something to hate. Because this is probably the first time in the book where he feels like he has a place, and it's very easy for him to hate because he has again no moral compass. He's he's so aware of his own existence that he thinks that nothing matters. So for him, hating is just a very it's a thing to be used to be integrated and to feel nice about himself.
To feel
So
alive.
to feel very much alive and to build an entire identity around it, as you can see in most right wing, extreme right wing, of course, at this point in time in both Portugal, Italy, Spain, US. You can have that. So it's an interesting thing. But yes, on that topical, I think that this story, the Sartre one, is very, very close to the French experience at that point in time. The fact that this came out in 1939 is insane. Maybe that's I don't know. You probably know this a little better than me, but I would very much be interested to know what happened to what happened to this book during the Nazi occupation. Although there is a very interesting way to look at this, even if you do the very nice thing of putting yourself in Nazi shoes, which is the book itself has nothing of a critique on it. There's nothing on it. You can read it. We look at it as a very sick thing. At least the very last part of it, where we actually delve into fascism and hate, misogyny, and racism. But you can look at that as just someone who lacked identity for an entirety of his life and now find it in his country, in his national pride, and now
Mhm.
he wants everyone out. You can read it without again without any kind of morals on it, or at least the wrong ones, and find that story a treat to nationalism, a treat to true French Republicans or something like that, or heat, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, there's a way to look at this book or at this short story, which is sincere.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which, now that I think of it, it's quite scary as well because it can be very much taken out of context.
Yes, yes. I can say because of your question, I went on the French Wikipedia page, which has a bit more details. And the only thing that it says about like the reception is that so the work was published in February 1939, a few months after the previous novel, The Nausea, La Nausée, and it was widely praised, except by the extreme right. And French writer Brasilac, who belongs to the French right, he described it as a boring and unhealthy author. So there you go.
That, well, that's my last 5 minutes of theory broken down by Wikipedia. It was a nice try.
Yeah, you know, I can see why in a way because it's so. I mean, I don't want to make a comment that's probably inaccurate, but it does feel like right now we are in an era of rampant um literary analphabetism. Is that how you say it?
Yes. What
Like
100%.
illiteracy, media
Media
illiteracy.
literacy, yes, exactly.
It's growing worse and worse to the point where something like this now would probably read. Back then, if you could read a book like this and get it in your hands, you will probably recognize what he was talking about, especially if you're not jumping straight to Childhood of a Leader, because you start off with a story about how rebels during the Spanish
Okay,
Civil
the
War
Civil War, yeah.
are forced and are tortured into giving up information. You have stories about um, women being too afraid of owning up to their intimacies, to their potential in life, and just deciding to stay in toxic relationships because that's actually the easiest solution to anything. You have, like the crazy guy who loses his mind and wants to kill six people with a six-shot revolver. So it's yeah. I wonder if someone ever did read it and see this Lucien Fleury as a nice guy, but also, it describes him having homosexual thoughts that he denies,
Yeah,
but
that's fair enough.
he's
That
having
is
them.
that
So
is
it does
fair
actually,
enough.
it does
But
have
the,
the,
but he
he is
then saw the light,
sodomized.
though. But he then saw the light.
Did
He
see the
then
light.
found the French flag and embraced it. And now let's be racist and
Nice
all come together.
liberty, equality, brotherhood.
And anti-Semitism.
We love to see it. We
We
love to
love to
see
see
it.
it.
Speaking of seeing, there
Ah.
is eh, there is one adaptation of this novella from 2015 by Brady Corbet or Corbett. I'm still not sure about that. But released in 2015, but quite a long years in the making. Brady Corbet, for people who don't know, was before becoming a director, he was an actor who worked in a variety of projects, culminating in indie European art house darlings. He worked with Lars von Trier. He worked with Michael Haneke. Um, I'm blanking. There was another one that he did. What's Greg Araki in the States with Mysterious Skin. He worked with some very legitimate, bold, no holds barred authors in his career as an actor. And it led to him wanting to be a filmmaker. He had an idea of adapting Childhood of a Leader, also based off of other novels about totalitarianism and writings like Anna Arendt and others from the first half of the 20th century. Had the idea, put it on the side. He worked on a film directed by Mona Fastvold. They got engaged, they got married, and she was like, "Hey, you should pick that project up again and actually do it, actually shoot it." She helped him rewrite the screenplay. Originally, it was supposed to have Juliette Binoche and Tim Roth as the parents, but they found it to be too dark. Juliette Binoche and Tim Roth, who
Juliette
have
Binoche I mean, Tim Roth has worked with Michael, with Michel Franco twice, and did Funny
Tar-
Games
did Funny
with Brady
Games,
Corbet. Yeah,
did Tarantino, like Juliette Binoche worked with Claire Denis multiple times. It's so fascinating. Leo Cara, like it's so fascinating that they read the screenplay of Childhood of a Leader and said, "This is way too dark for us. We're not doing this." One person that did stay on board was Robert Pattinson, and then finally they shot the film with Bérénice Bejo and the good Liam Cunningham, Stacey Martin, and Tom Sweet as the titular child from the Childhood of a Leader. Raphael, what are your thoughts on this film? Your first time watch, correct?
yes, yes. First time watch. This is probably the first film that I ever had into my watch list on Letterboxd. So that's a very nice. This podcast was very nice because
Yeah.
made me feel like I've actually done something with me. I'm not kidding. This was the first film I've logged on my watch list back in 20, I think 16 or 17 when I started Letterboxd. So yeah,
That's amazing.
this film is one of those that is the best contraceptive that you can show anyone. Kids are hateful. You do not want to have them. No, it's not that bad, but this kid is very scary. Yeah, I'm very. If we had a very interesting discussion with Zone of Interest, but it was both a film and a book that I got my hand on almost immediately. This film is not leaving my mind, and I am I'm feeling very conflicted about Childhood of a Leader from Brady Corbet. Um, it's again, we've talked about this in Zone of Interest, that we're talking about very different experiences and very different stories. We could almost try to give a different name to this film,
Try to give a
and
different name to this
you would
film,
not
and
think of
you would not
Jean-Paul
think
Sartre.
of Le Jean-Paul Sartre.
Short story,
Short story,
but
but
this
this
one,
one,
in
in
the
the
same
same
way,
way, is very cold, very detached, even more. I would say because it's very quiet. Most of the conversations that are going around are not about the kid, uh, or when they are, they're not very positive. But there's a lot of talk of war. We are on the film is. I don't think you've done the you've talked very much about the film, but it pretty much goes around on France in I think 1919.
Correct.
Around the time they were preparing the Treaty of Versailles. And Liam Cunningham, the father of the child, is an American like secretary for the president around that time, which I think it was Wilson. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson.
Yes, and trying to find a way to end the war. Um, and so around them, there is this kid, his son, which everyone is keep mistaking for a girl, a thing that also happened in the book. And the kid is very quiet. He's very observant. He's very inadequate. He doesn't know how to behave, and it gets more and more creepy. But I don't think it is the context around him, at least the war thing that we are looking at around him, that is making him behave this way. I think it's very much a story of l- complicated relations with paternity, around what you feel about father figures and mother figures, and how that influences the way you look at the world. He's very unloved, and he has a very weird way of expressing it. But once again, every time I think about this film, I look at something that makes me think, no, actually, it's a lot of what's happening around him that is making him feel that way. But at the same time, the film is so cold and bleak and almost as anything. It doesn't. It's a film of people talking in rooms. That's almost that. You have some
Yeah.
very disturbing episodes with a kid, but they are very small, though creepy, but small. Uh, and I don't know. It almost felt like at some points it felt like it was undercooked. And I think that the having seen the both films that Brady Corbet did after this, both Vox Lux and Brutalist, I think that both of them are better films than this. But I think that this as the seeds for what would be Brady Corbet more as a writer, because I think he's very well developed as a director in this. But I think some themes in this and some ways of looking at it are s- I don't know how they. I'm still processing it, but I've been like talking for hours and on this. I really want to know what you think of the film.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting actually. I had seen this once already. This was only my second time watching it, but similar to what you said, it is a film that has stuck with me. Especially the opening and the ending. I want to save the ending for the actual end of this conversation because we can. It's a whole can of worms just trying to talk about those final 10 minutes. Um, but just right from the opening, it's a film that hooks you. You have this newsreel footage, kind of like highlight reel of World War One, leading up to the events of the film, end of 1918, beginning of 1919, with Scott Walker's music, which is upsetting, overwhelming, loud, audacious, this orchestral nightmare of strings that. Um, I was reading some reviews and analysis that say that sometimes almost overshadow the film itself, which I kind of agree with because it's so strong. It really does.
I'll
Um,
let me just tell you one thing on Scott Walker,
go for it.
because when I saw that once again, the way that Brady Corbet works credits is something to behold. I love.
It's so good.
I've not seen Vox Lux in a while, and when I saw Vox Lux, it was the first film that I was seeing from Brady Corbet. So I'm wondering if the credits have the same presentation as they have both in Child of Leader and Brutalist. But the way that they open the film and fill up the screen in the beginning, it's amazing. And when the name of Scott Walker came up, I almost cried because it was such a beauty moment for me. Because I'm, as you know, I'm a huge Black Country New Road fan, and they reference Scott Walker directly on one of his songs. Isaac Wood says, and I'm pretty sure Sunglasses, I'm modern Scott Walker, and I'm surprising smooth talker. Um, and when I was listening to this soundtrack, which, as you said, is very operatic, very dramatic, very scary at some points, very epic, it did remind me a lot of that album from Black Country New Road, which made me feel very engaged with it. And you said it almost overshadows the film. I think for a film that has soul is lacking so much emotion on the characters. I think the directing is doing that for the characters themselves. I think most of the feels that you use that you take out of the film do come from the music, the very almost dirty and dark production design. The house looks almost like a horror, an haunted mansion or something like that. So I think most of the things that you should be feeling or that comes most from what is happening in front of the camera more than what is actually in the page.
Definitely. There's so many movies that are period pieces that try to look good but they end up looking cheap. They end up looking too new, too fresh. This is the opposite of that. This film is just coldness from beginning to end, and the fact that you have most of the action taking place in this French mansion, which was actually shot, I want to say, in Budapest, Hungary, Eastern Europe. um but it's all decaying with like rotting walls, barely any furniture, because at the end of the day this is a temporary home for this American diplomat to be staying in with his family. And despite it being his temporary home, he's trying to have the child. um learn French, or not so much him, but rather the mother who is the wife of the diplomat, but she's of German origin. She was the daughter of a missionary, correct? So she traveled around the world a lot. She learned a lot of languages, and already there you have two elements of religion, which is very prevalent in here. Like right from the opening scene, you have this little angel. Oh my god, look at this little kid, which also we haven't mentioned yet. He's called haha. So I
What, the
was looking
kid?
the kid, yeah, in the
Tom
film because
Sweet.
um
No, the kid is Prescott. The name of
Prescott,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
yes,
looking for
it's
the kid
only
itself.
mentioned once, just before you. Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that, yeah. Correct, Prescott. He's dressed up as this little angel, but also there's this element of language, which is something that I
Yes.
am obsessed with, like characters speaking specific languages in movies. Corbet is obsessed with it, as we saw with
Yeah.
The Brutalist as well. Um, and in here, it is interesting. Like again, we had this conversation in Zone of Interest, and you mentioned it as well. If you remove the title of the movie and called it somewhere else, something else, you wouldn't necessarily directly tie it to the book. But I find it interesting to look at this film almost as an objective, if you can even use that word, God's eye point of view of what was happening with the same or similar character, because at the end of the day they are different characters, but similar character in his childhood in the book.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking about, you know, the existence, trying to understand himself, discovering his own sexuality, and so you have these moments where Corbet uses, or rather the cinematographer Lowell Crowley, same one as Brutalist as
Brutalist.
well, award winning now, Oscar winning,
Lovely
and
thing.
oh man, and here there are those shots that are, I don't even know how to describe them. They are wide angle with extreme bokeh and god rays, just like these distorted images that appear a few times throughout the movie. You have this one shot when he's walking in the countryside with the mother, and it just sells you this loneliness that the character is feeling. And on the opposite side, you have this extreme close up when he's being taught by Ada, this French country girl who also speaks English. Is teaching him French, the French language, by reading the I keep forgetting the name in English, but like
I
Aesop's.
actually I don't know the name of this. I of course I know the story, but I don't know the name of it.
The author, like I keep forgetting how you actually say it in English, but like in Italian it was Esopo, and the Edipo, like these fables essentially. And there is again, I'm getting lost here, but there is this extreme close up on just her chest, and she's wearing this shirt. It's very warm, and the sun is peeking through it, and she's not wearing a bra, and you can just kind of see the nipple, and it's just lingering on that. And later on, he tries to touch it in a way that's very not even childlike. It's just
It's very
mechanical.
purposeful. Yeah, it's purposeful though. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so knowing everything that the book equivalent character is going through and thinking, trying to transplant some of those ideas into young Prescott kind of fits. Also,
Mhm.
this hate love relationship with his mother, that's actually more hate than anything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, how did you feel about all of this? I just like dumped concepts.
No, no, that is my
Thoughts.
specialty. So you're just serving me my own food. No, I can definitely see that. But when you put, the if you try to compare that, there's a few elements on it that they do match. Both the fact that there is a weird relationship with the maid, because there is not Ada is a much more like uh, younger version, but I'm talking about the actual mate, so it's called Mona.
She's so
Um,
lovely.
yeah, and and as a great final line to her, like, film, I really like that. Just I don't think it led to much, but I really found it very disconcerting. Um, but yeah, there is definitely something to be said about the way they compare. But weirdly enough, in this film, there's a lot of focus on the fact that he has a very complicated relationship with his mother, and we talk a lot on on the book of like how he feels about his mother and all. But his mother loves him in the book. He's a loved child. In this one, there's not much of that. There's a point in this film where the mother says, "We can be friends again," implying that they are actually very much not friends. Um, she pretty much dumps every kind of responsibility of the child to the maid. Um,
Yeah.
Even the opening moments of the film, the opening sequence where we have the kid, uh, not the opening sequence, but the one that precedes that after we have Liam Cunningham and Robert Pattinson discussing in a room, Le Fleur gets back to the house with his mother after having a tantrum. We need to talk about the way these are chapters because I found it very cute. Um,
First tantrum.
yeah, but there's always a sense of where is Mona? Why isn't Mona taking care of the kid? Why do I leave? Why did I give Mona the night off? Stuff like that. So his mother is not very present at all. So there is a lot of talk in this and but more in the book about Freud and what he wants of his mother and all that. And but in this one, he hates his mother, or more, his mother hates him. I think there's much of that in this. It's a reluctant mother, or she doesn't really know what to do with the kid. It's a complicated relationship, but I think it's a different relationship that we have um, in the actual book. Some themes are definitely going around, but I do think that the book is much more direct in its approach to fascism and all that. Whereas in this, I think that delve into that, it's much more open to discussion, which I think we will when we get to the end.
Yeah, and also speaking, just continuing this line of thought with the mother character, you have primarily female characters present throughout this story. Like the men are off doing their own thing, they're working, the father is barely present. And so much of these characters is implied, as you mentioned. There is one moment when, after Prescott has finished class with Ada, she goes away, but he finds her talking to his father,
Mhm.
and they are actually just talking. It's not like he finds him in any compromising position, but they act almost as if they were caught and they try to downplay it. Did something actually happen or not? It's unclear. Later on, we have a very disturbing scene where the father is trying to have sex
Yeah.
with the wife, bordering on sexual assault. I could even say it is sexual assault, basically, because she's sick in bed and is forcing himself on her. Where he just wants another child. He wants another child because he clearly does not like it this one.
Also, he wanted a daughter. I think it's very much implied in some of parts of the film that he wanted a daughter, which I think it does come into play again when he has long hair. People confuse him with a little girl. A lot of times, actually.
A lot of
And once
times.
one of them in front of his father
Yes,
in
yes.
a war room, in a way.
War, and right after that, the child appears again,
Yes.
buck naked, kind of like almost as a proof of like I'm not a little girl. I look at this, which is very childish. It is a tantrum, as the title cards state. Um, but again, the only way that the father knows how to react is either it's scolding Mona for not holding him hostage in his room, like what's she supposed to do, and then he just beats him up basically.
Breaks
And
his
this
arm.
Yeah, like breaks his arm or dislocates his shoulder. It's not super clear what happened. Does he actually break his arm? I don't remember if they.
I think it's a bit forced because he's playing a character again, but he's definitely hurt.
He is hurting him a lot, definitely. And in all of that, yes, you have the mother who also mentions that she never, in not so much that she didn't want this child, but having Prescott almost killed her. Um, so there's a lot of those dynamics at play here, and it all goes back to the child, but not so much just the child, but the entire context of what's happening, because we are talking about the end of the war, a moment where Woodrow Wilson, especially because he is name dropped multiple times, the father is working for him. Indirectly, he also mentions, because at some point they were like, "What, the president?" It's like, "Ah, like I'll actually talk to him." It sounds like we're best friends. Um, which almost reminded me of a moment in The Brutalist, but that's another point. Um, and like Woodrow Wilson had this famous. I remember from when we studied it in school. He had his 14 points, his plan for preserving peace in Europe following the war, which in some ideas was okay. So preserving peace and whatnot, but in other ways, it was essentially trying to control the dangerous forces in Europe from not doing what they did in the 1910s. And this level of control, of American control especially, this is the moment when they become the true power that they wanted to be. You don't really have that prior to the Great War, as they call it. um, and so I don't know, like, how do you feel about this entire the way this political context can play into this child? Because we mentioned in the book it is a French tale set in France and all of that. And in this case, it's an American director with American characters transplanted into Europe.
Let's also say one thing. A very weird looking guy from Arizona uh, became a guy who's doing a lot of European films about European history with some sensibilities, which I found very curious about Brady Corbet. Uh, Especially because he always plays kind of weirdos. So I'm glad about it. I really like him. Yeah, I told you in the beginning that I've been reading Ishiguro's Remains of the Day, which has a very big section on it around the way that maybe Europe was being too harsh on Germany, on Versailles. So it became most of a revenge more than actually uh, trying to rebuild Europe. And you can almost trace back to what happened in Versailles to what actually would culminate in the Second World War again, the rise of nationalism in Germany, because it also came from a deep anger of the German people around what was actually being done to them. There's a line in this when they're talking about
Yes.
the and discussing what they're going to do with coal, and they're saying if we take Germany's coal, there is no way that they will actually be able to get back. And there's one guy who said, "Why would they? I don't want them to rebuild. I want them to kind of die." It's pretty much
Yeah.
what he implies. So yeah, this kid is around a mother who kind of hates him, a father who wanted a girl, with no other children to play around because, well, he's a creep. And
His only
people,
mother figure is fired, is
yeah,
completely removed from his life.
and it's very scary when he actually pushes his mother out of the room in that moment. I had chills on that, but it's almost curious that the father itself does have some political spine in it. He does look like he's on the right side kind of things. He's not as vengeful in a way as the other guy is. But even that, what they're talking about in Versailles, it's almost the death of Germany in a way. I'm not an historian, so I mean, take all of this with a pinch of salt, of course. Um, but the way it was treated as a revenge, especially from the French, kind of, and I mean, let's face it, with some justice to it, there is definitely anger to be had on those terms. That we are looking at this more than 100 years after it, so we have this distance now to actually look at it. Um, but at what point does this, even being around of people that want revenge on a national on the global scale. Almost, they want uh, vengeance and retribution for an entire people, almost wanting to sign a contract. The treaty itself has well, will kill them very slowly, and this amount of coldness, does it actually comes out in this kid? But why would it? Because the film does not say that. It's very frustrating in that sense, because I think the ingredients of it are there, but I think that at some points it's almost too much left to interpretation, almost too, there's too much open space in it to actually manage to connect some of the stuff. I think there's some moments in a film where you could bring some of these elements together, even on the slightest of things that would connect. But the only connection that you have with this political uh, thing that is going around, and the connection with the boy is very light, is very, he's not aware enough of it. I think he's not aware enough. He's aware of some things, but I don't think he even cares that much about them. It treats everything like a tantrum, as we, as Corbet actually says, uh, at least 3 times. So I don't know. I think there is something of in the. We'll get back to the end again, because we
We're getting
actually,
closer, getting
yes, we,
closer.
there is when it actually tells you something. But I think that before that, I think that at some points, Child of the Leader as a film, I think I know what he's trying to do, and I like what he's trying to do. I think it needed just a little bit more work on the page, a bit more, even some elements here and there. I think that the only moments where you have this sexual connection that I loved were like the nightmares that the kid has, which get some abstract images of it, but then it becomes very futuristic. He's pretty much seeing what he's getting at, and all that. I love those scenes. Love those scenes. I think they visually they work. They're very eerie. Scott Walker's score on those is astonishing. Works very well, but I would like a bit more of a slight connection on the kid itself and what is happening around him.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find Corbet to be very much a provocative filmmaker. Also, going back
He's
to all the people,
worked with people like that, so I would imagine
masters,
so.
masters, and I like that in the reception that there is to his movies. Generally speaking, not about me and you, but I remember watching Vox Lux in Venice, and people were loving the first half. Then there's a time jump. They fucking hated the second half. They had big boos at the screening. I've had multiple conversations with various people who really love the first half of The Brutalist, really don't like the second half of it. And in a similar way, not to that extreme, but Childhood of a Leader does the same thing, because yeah, the first half, that's like you said in the beginning, this chamber piece family drama that just happens to be set during this very important political time, and then around the second tantrum, or like an hour into the movie, it just leads these two elements, like the personal of the kid with the political, in a way that is ambiguous, as you mentioned, but I think it can either be looked in a very straightforward way, like directly tying things one to the other, or alternatively, we can look at it more metaphorically. If we look at the child as either Europe or the states themselves or whatever, I like a more slightly literal interpretation, because the other one gets a bit too thorny and convoluted to think about. But one thing that I like, especially now thinking about the conversation that we had with the novella by Sartre, is that that story is inherently French, and there is, you can almost see how the root of evil and the root of totalitarianism is present in France before the Nazis even arrive. Maybe it was even endorsed by some people when they came. They're like, finally, we're getting some change, some good leadership. Something similar could be said about the United States. Um, it's not so, and I like that essentially we have two different types of leaders here, because I remember, like, I know how this movie ends, and so reading the book, I was like, oh, when he talks about the childhood of a leader, he means not so much a political leader or a dictator himself, but rather the leader of a factory of workers, or but a leader that can have even more influence in that way on a microcosm in his own town, in his own city. And Corbet takes that and says, what if, like, it just, it's similarly again to Vox Lux and the Brutalist, who feel so much like a part of true history. You're watching this ending in Childhood of a Leader, where it almost feels like he's portraying something that actually happened. And that's when I feel like we go into full metaphor in those final minutes, because for the listeners, small recap, you have the final dinner after the Treaty of Versailles has been signed, everything is going peachy and dandy. But throughout the story, Prescott is starting to refute everything. The love of his the lack of love of his family is completely dead at this point. Any type of belief that he had in religion has died. He has no affections. He doesn't have his tutor anymore. He rejected her himself by proving that he could learn French on his own. He's really much obsessed with the story of the mouse and the lion that that he keeps reading, to the point that that becomes his symbol, the lion's mouth. Um, and at the end, he also rejects religion. He rejects everything. His mother gets very upset at him during this big dinner when he just starts shouting these things, and he hits her, potentially kills her with a blunt object. He runs away. He trips and falls just like he does in the beginning of the movie. And he gets comforted not by his father, but by someone we haven't mentioned actually during this entire conversation. Um, but Charles Merker, something like that, played by Robert Pattinson, a dear family friend. Um, Very much someone who has a history of sorts with the wife. I'll, we can understand by the ending of the film that he's probably the father of Prescott the Bastard, as the final title says. And so what we witness is this 10-minute horror sequence of a regime, an American regime, English speaking regime, where things are getting in motion, things are getting in place for something big to happen. And there's going to be a big speech from someone who is that Prescott, older, looking like Robert Pattinson, speaking with a nice American accent, and the crowd loves him. Is evil, fascism, totalitarianism just embedded in American belief as well? What do you think, Raphael?
What can you say about this ending? Because yeah, the end is very direct. I think I think that's the first time in the film where you actually have something that is, yeah, this is it. This is what you have
And
as of now.
unexpected, like, how did it feel for
Very
you?
unexpected. It's very unexpected. Uh, I will tell one thing. I think if I watched this film back in 2015 and I didn't know what Corbet does with father figures and mother figures and the kids, and they made the same actors play the same character at different times.
Trademark now.
Yes, I don't think I would immediately go back to maybe Charles Marker being the biological father. I was almost looking at it because he was running around and trying to pick him up, and he's the one who picks him up after he falls down. I think he's the mentoring, is the leadership side of it. The once again someone that picks you up and actually explains you the world and puts their own beliefs in you, which is something that he's been lacking before because his father doesn't care that much. His mother, doesn't like him very much as well. So there's no love on that family at any point. And then he has someone to actually nurture him and explain him the ways of the world. And I almost read it on that. I would almost read it like that if I didn't know what Brady Corbet does in these moments. Also, he does very much like to put the camera upside down and just shake it. It's a very brutalist shot.
I love that
Again,
shot
I
so
love it.
much.
It's so good. It's
Which,
so good.
if I remember correctly, the way they achieved it was literally just starting the camera, focusing on the little girl, and then they had it being passed around by people in the crowd. Like crowd surfing during a concert, only it's a camera, and it's coupled with the very quick reveal. I mean, it's not even a reveal shot because you see him in the car, but just that one shot of Robert Pattinson exiting the car and the camera just starts swerving around, and Scott Walker's soundtrack just increases in tension. I can see why it won Best Director and Best Debut Film
Oh,
in Venice
100%.
in the Orizzonti
100%.
section, because
As
it's I mean, you cannot like the movie beforehand, find it boring, whatever, it's fine. But I'd be shocked by anyone not being on the edge of their seat during this
yeah,
moment, being like, what is happening now?
yeah. I, I'm still. I think that the end is as surprising as it is very direct. Um, but even so, I have now the same complaint that the people had with the Brutal is, which I didn't have. I love the Brutal. It's my favorite film of the year. Let's put it like this. And I absolutely love every single minute of it and every connection it has, both on the first part and the second part. But I do think there is a slight disconnect between the end of the film and what we have on the what hour 40 before that. I think, but I think it can be looked in very many different ways if you watch it again. And I actually will put this on my rewatch list
Yay.
because I think I'll take a lot of out of it because I think there is a way of looking at it on like there are some things that cannot be explained. Maybe we are so eager to explain evil and to explain these people, these leaders, these both political and now technological CEOs, all of them, almost pretty much every single one of them, entire pieces of shit. It's very hard to explain these people. They are simplistic in a way which we don't particularly like. And maybe that's what's scary about them, about these figures, and maybe that is what Corbet is saying, is that yeah, these people are kind of weird, but it's maybe you can't put your finger on what it is. These people maybe are not adequate. They feel inadequate to some moments in their life. Maybe they struggle with their own identity and stuff like that. But then the jump that can do to actually being a fascist leader uh, in such a simplistic way that the very symbol of this regime is the lion from the fable that he keeps reading and where he learns French. Uh, Things maybe don't have complex explanations,
And
or maybe you can get to the point of it and maybe we are just foolish to try to give some kind of understanding or try to find reasons for these people to be evil. I don't know, I'm digressing a little bit, but
no, no, no.
this film just posed me so many questions that I'm still working around. It's a great film. Let's put it like that. I'm struggling with it quite a bit.
It takes a while. I want to say all three of his movies take a while to um be fully digested. And when I say a while, I mean weeks,
Mhm.
potentially months. I ended up loving. I really enjoyed Vox Lux on first watching. I still haven't rewatched it, which I hate. I've been meaning to rewatch it since 2018. Um, but that one is something that I loved more as I was trying to defend it back in the day. I was one of very few people
Yeah. 100%.
loving it. Um, and with something like Childhood of a Leader, it's so blunt, but still like I think he Corbet really took to heart the idea that good art should create questions rather than give answers
Yeah.
to a baffling extent potentially. But I appreciate it because it leads to some interesting conversations. And even then, like, I wonder if this entire obsession that he starts developing, young Prescott, with the fable of the lion and the mouse. It's like, oh, okay, you helped me once. I thought you were this little mouse. I let you go, but then you actually saved me in the future. So, keep your friends close. Be very gentle. Don't underestimate people, the small ones especially. He twisted it in a way. He took it to, again, misreading it, took it to a fascist extreme. And even the idea that you mentioned, I like the idea of, if he's not actually the biological son of Charles Merker, the Robert Pattinson character, maybe just the mentoring turned him into that person, because he's having this conversation in the beginning, which, in retrospect, just watching that scene alone kind of potentially highlights some things with the ending. Is that they're talking about, the evil with people and the good and the bad. And it says this line about, it's not so much like I'm talking about not the evil that one man can do, but the lack of good that many
Yes.
let it run rampant, which is re-quoting. I don't remember who said it, that line. Many people have said it over
No, but
the
it's a
decades.
quote about a completely different thing that was then used to describe the Holocaust.
Yeah, yeah. That's like one man. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. What did you think about? Uh, because it was the only image that I got on this when we see Pattinson on the car. I only saw Nosferatu.
With a nice
It's
little
the bald
big
head and
mustache.
the mustache, the very pointy, a very creepy mustache. So it's very good to see Robert Pattinson going back to his vampire roots.
I want to say I hate this, but because I'd seen clips like an hour before watching the movie, I thought of Dr. Eggman from the Sonic films. Jim
Actually,
Carrey.
that's very enough.
This was like the first image. But I was thinking about something else because I was reading some press that was going around before the film's release. And people, especially the Twilight fans, were like, oh my god, Robert Pattinson again. He did Cosmopolis. Maps to the Stars was the same year, right? It was also 2015, I believe. Like, he'd started to go into The Rover, like all of those non young adult romantic roles, but actually more challenging with authors. And people were pestering Corbet, asking him if he was going to play Hitler. He was like, "Oh, dictatorship, the leader, is he going to play Hitler?" And he was like, "No, he's not. There's no Hitler in this film. You'll be surprised by who he ends up playing." And so I'm wondering if he has, because I think he himself does have an equivalent, potentially. I can't for the life of me think who that might be. The look is
The
like
look
Stalin
is
a
yeah,
little
the look is
bit.
very Soviet. The
The
look is very
redness
Soviet.
as well. You have the
Yeah, yeah.
reds, that's very fashion, the like Nazi
The star.
imagery, but
It has
also
the star as well.
as a star. Like, it's all of this. Like, again, I don't think it's meant to be one person specifically. I was reading, so it's like ending explained. It's like, no, I don't think it's meant to be just one, but
Yeah.
I
I
like the
think
idea of
it's
just the
very
evil.
much fictional in a way.
Yeah,
Yes, you can see that it's American because of the language and all that, but I think it's not supposed to be looked at in like having an equivalent to it in this thing.
it's not
It,
Eisenhower or
no,
anything like that.
yeah, I think you get to fully fictional and fully like fascism is very bad. And there's a conversation in this once again on the war room about how the Soviets, the Bolsheviks in this situation, picked up some stuff from Marxism and just picked and choose what they wanted to use. And that goes back to what you said about language
Said
and
about
media illiteracy
language and
and
media
trying
illiteracy
to take things
and
out of
trying to
context to
take
fill
things out
your
of
own
context to fill
purposes,
your own
as
purposes,
he did
as
with the
he did
lion
with the
as well.
lion as
So
well.
it's the
So
way
it's the
that
way that
you
you
can
can
twist
twist
around
around
language,
language,
storytelling,
storytelling,
even
even
history
history
itself,
itself,
as
as
we've
we've
been
been
seeing
seeing
quite a lot in the last few years to get to these positions. There's so much conversation to be had about this.
Yeah, and
As you said, it poses a lot of questions.
yeah, and it's disturbing, especially if you just like the image. I think it's an unshakable final image, that the one in this film. Um, but not so much for the waving camera, but also the fact that it cuts away to this almost lost child in the crowd. Everyone else is cheering, everyone else is excited about this, but she looks almost scared. I don't know if she's like the promise that there's still some hope and some innocence inside this regime. Um, but the timing of it is insane as well. That Corbet had this idea early 2010s, developed the script with Mona Fastfold around 2012, 2014, got funding, shot it in 2014, and by the time it came out properly in 2016,
Yeah.
you know what was
We
what was going to
yeah, the
happen.
orange guy.
The orange guy, keep coming back to him, damn it. Um, and he himself found it funny, and he was like, "Yeah, like there's definitely parallels. They're not meant by design, but I think similar to what we were talking about with the zone of interest, it's so specific about one historical fact, but the actual way that we get to these points is sadly universal in history and time. How we just keep repeating these patterns of of violence and hate, and it's just like it is in the book, where you see people who are scared, who don't understand what's going on, and they need someone to just guide them. I think the idea of turning that French story into an American tale that's very much constrained. It actually feels closer to what Sartre would have written in one of the short stories. Where it's like one
Yeah.
location, one period in
Hmm.
time, pretty much, just a few months. Um, and takes it to this more universal extreme that just leaves you feeling a bit empty. Even the lack of end credits, like it just credits the orchestra. Like if Scott Walker and the orchestra and the movie is over. Like you don't have any respite
It's
after
much
it.
bleaker in that sense. The film is even the way that it's separate. Separated in chapters and tantrums, as he puts it. It's very. It is a very epic. Once again, he's developed a filmmaking that was present from the beginning. Maybe it comes from like probably the likes of Kubrick and people like this of making the epic, like the Brutalist felt an epic film. Mostly a lot comes from the music once again,
Yeah.
but it does feel like it's a gigantic tale when you get to the end. It feels bigger than itself. It feels like it's playing in a much larger canvas than you're actually than what you actually um, watching. So when the film just goes into complete overture in the final moments, and you already had credits in the beginning. I was actually expecting a complete cut to black. So I was surprised to see Scott Walker's name again. I would say, but it's very bleak. It's very dark, and it's I don't I you saw I saw that girl as just what will happen in the like the last person you see in this film. I think it's a little girl, and I think it's just showing you what we had in the beginning. We're also presented with kids in the opening of the film, and are presented with the kid again being surrounded by hate. We think we don't know much of this regime, but we can very much imply that.
Doesn't look fun.
It doesn't look particularly fun. It's very gray as well. It's very sterile. It's very white and gray and creepy. But yeah, is this just happening again? It's probably making that thing that the context, the nurture of it, will destroy kids' minds, as we see today. Kids are little shits.
It's a
But
scary time.
it's
I'm
a
more
very
afraid
scary.
when I go out of we call them baby gangs. Baby gangs in Italy. It's just teenagers and even younger people actually at this point going around terrorizing the place, which sounds, I mean, 10, 15 years ago would have sounded extreme, but actually it's the truth of what's going on right now.
I had this week is one of the headlines in Portugal is that three kids that are kind of influencers around 16 year olds, three little guys, three little shitheads just sexually assaulted a fan. They promised to her to that they would get like live stream or something on Instagram, and they ended up like recording them raping the girl. So I mean, kids and adolescents are little shits. It's in their nature. It's part of it. But it's becoming a very scary time to be a kid and be an adolescent, mostly because what you have around you does shape the minds of the kids.
Yeah.
We are seeing this. I mean, why do we keep doing these books and films, Nick? Why do you keep bringing me to this podcast just to be depressed around like 2025's like civilizational collapse? Because last time we were here for Zone of Interest and we talked about also very topical again the white ribbon. We also have a bit of crossover here
True, true.
with kids being little shits. Um, yeah, it's a scary time to be aware. Again, it's a very scary time to be self-aware. So Sartre maybe was onto something.
Truly, truly. It's a very bleak note to end this conversation on.
Yeah.
But I
Fuck.
promise next time it will be a much more fun book to talk about. Trust me,
What?
Raphael.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
It's
is.
definitely not going to be
It is.
Polish sci-fi horror with Russian
Yeah.
adaptations.
Actually, on that note, I will not reveal the what we'll be talking about, but I can tell you that I'll watch it in the big screen in 2 days.
Oh my!
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
lucky boy!
it's a very important moment for me.
Amazing. Can't wait to hear more about that. It's time for the last question then before we go into our favorite moments. After this conversation, which version of Childhood of a Leader do you prefer? Do you prefer the Jean-Paul Sartre novella inside The Wall collection of short stories or the Brady Corbet adaptation?
This time I'll go for Sartre. I'll go for
Hey,
I'll go for the short story. Though I think the film is very very good, and it has elements, especially the music from Scott Walker and cinematography from Paul Crowley. I think there's elements of the film that it's, at least in my mind, having seen it only once, they do feel slightly undercooked on the page, at least not on the directing side of it. I think it's amazing stuff being done there. But I think that some things could. But I think it will work much better on rewatch. So I'll put an asterisk on that. Still, for now, the short story just made me very uncomfortable multiple times. It did felt like it had something to say that was very scary, very creepy, and in the context of that book and the time that it was written, I think there's a lot to be said on that. So yeah, at this moment in time, with an asterisk, with some doubt in my heart, I will say the short story.
nice. I I was actually going back and forth during this conversation, thinking which one do I prefer. I think I will have to agree with you actually with the short story, mainly because I've been reading a lot digitally. This is the most notes I've taken whilst reading, just like copying the quotes, highlighting them in red. I don't think I've ever taken this many quotes. There's so many passages in here that Sartre writes that speak to a profoundly human level, which makes what happened to Lucien even more disturbing. The fact that some of these ideas I've had, some of these feelings, the feeling that you maybe are alone in the world, no one understands you, you don't really exist. How can you prove you exist? How can you find meaning in life? How can you find love and acceptance? And he ends up finding it in the worst of places because he's not guided properly, because he's looking for it in other people before trying to find it inside himself. And you see something similar in the film as well, but taken to a different extent, to a different extreme. Um, but yeah, I still really love the movie. It's been 5 years since I first watched it, and it has stuck with me. All of Corbet's films have stuck with me. I would say he's one of the best directors working today, and especially like, I mean, we had this whole conversation. We didn't say that he was 26, 27 when he directed Childhood of a
Yeah,
Leader.
27 years old doing this.
You know what I'm gonna do as a debut? Adaptation of
But this is
Sartre with
oh my
Hannah
god.
Arendt and other writers in the end
Um,
credits reference, which is again like I had this thought with Carson on the Clappercast talking about La Chimera, Alicia Wacker, and I am obsessed with directors putting their literary references in the end credits, and he does it here, and it's just like okay. I was looking at it and I almost felt scared. I was like, I don't have nearly enough time to research all of the references that he puts in the end credits. Um, but alas, this conversation with Shadow of a Leader was very deep, insightful, pessimistic. Sartre would be proud. Sartre would be very proud. Do you have a favorite quote from the book that spoke to you? There's plenty, of course. I'm curious to know which one you picked. I hope it's not the same one I wrote down.
no, I don't think it was. I think it was not even something that I've mentioned during this conversation, but it
Hey,
really struck me when I was because it's something that I am a lot of times being confronted even in my own house. Which when the family is discussing Lucien going to like the extremist side of politics and to those fascist groups, his father says, "Oh, it's fine him to have his beliefs. He needs to find his place in the world and all." And no, it is not. No, it is not okay. No, it is not. Let's put
let him
it.
grow.
Let's put it in this the most blunt way. Not every opinion is valid. People, fascism is bad, hate is bad. It's not up for debate. It's not a kind of belief. It's not something that you can grow out of. It's just something that you need to work now. It is not okay. So let's not make it okay. And that passage really spoke to me because I come across with it every single day. We see every single day people when we're, especially us that are left leaning, when we talk about stuff that is happening in Gaza. And what we think that the Jewish, that the not the Jewish, I'm sorry, the Israeli, not all Israelis, of course, as we've seen the last few weeks on the No Other Land discourse
Jesus,
and all
yeah.
that. But people, when we talk about this, when we talk about the rise of far rights all through Europe, and even in our own televisions, in our own parliaments, we hear people say the most disgusting, racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, misogynist stuff, and people say, "Oh, but they're allowed to have their own beliefs." No, they are not. This is not okay. This is actually, this is something that is in Portugal, is in the constitution. It is something that you cannot do. It's a crime. Racism is a crime in a way. In some countries, in some constitutions, racism is a crime. So let's treat it as such, and let's not take it as, he'll grow out of it. It's fine. Let him
Let
find his own
let him figure it
way.
out. Let him figure it
Let him
out.
figure it. No, no. Pick up that kid and try to actually do something. Please act. Please don't. Sorry, I got angry.
No, no, no.
Go, go, go.
It's lack of responsibilities or lack of ownership of just the world we're living in. I mean, this is what we witnessed with our parents' generation, essentially the post World War II generation who was let run loose, and you have had so many people that could have stopped certain things from leading up to where we are now, where they were just completely passive. It was like, no, it's fine. Let them do. It's not gonna happen again. It's okay. Let's just let them do whatever they want. And even then, like you were saying that it's illegal in Portugal in the constitution. Like even in Italy, technically, bringing up fascist symbols and um, certain hand wavings, if you want to call it that,
Mm,
certain gestures.
yeah.
It is technically illegal, still openly doing it in
I
the
mean,
streets.
you still
So
have some symbols of Mussolini around Rome, I think, and Milan.
uh,
So
not just Rome, not just Rome. I remember
yeah.
one time we went, small digression, in this tiny town in the northeast of Italy, where one house, it felt like a parody, but it was 100% genuine. You had an old man, and inside he had like you could just see because it was summer, open windows and whatnot. He had a bust of Mussolini, and just the radio was playing 1940s propaganda. It felt like we were, just like you're transported into a different time. It's like this is what 2019, something like that. Um, what a world we live in. My quote for from the book, it says, he had believed that he existed by chance for a long time, but it was due to a lack of sufficient thought. His place in the sun was marking Ferrol long before his birth. They were waiting for him long before his father's marriage. If he had come into the world, it was to occupy that place. I exist, he thought, because I have the right to exist. This is towards the culmination of his character arc, um, which again goes into that disturbing idea of the predestination and of is ultimate, like that's the tragedy almost of him, is that in pursuit of finding himself he goes back to the starting point
Yeah.
of everything and just embraces it in the worst way possible. What's your favorite scene then, or quote or passage from the film that stood out to you?
From the film, I really liked the nightmare scene, if you can call it that. But it goes back to the predestination thing that you were talking
Yeah.
about. It's this little, and it's very weird that the next scene is him going to his mother and said, "I wet the bed," which I found very funny. I think at some points, Corbet's taking the piss just slightly. I think
Yeah.
we've seen especially in the Brutalist, it doesn't take himself as serious as the films look. I think he has humor and he's funny. He's just a guy from Arizona, I've seen, so he's a nice guy in that sense.
Simple man.
Simple man of simple taste, but does very great and complex films. But that whole sequence, especially the way it was directed and the editing in that was beautiful. You got stuff from the building where you see in the end. It's almost disconcerting because you do see elevators, and it's not you are not sure where you are at that point because it does not add up to the technology and to everything that you saw through the rest of the film. But it has a very creepy, very disconcerting tone to it. It's very abstract and visually disconcerting. Uh, and I love that movement. If it's not that, is the discussion that they are having on the war room. Let's call it that again. Around what they're doing to Germany, and you have the economist actually explaining Marx and explaining what Marx is. Once again, a wink to Sartre. I would expect
Yeah, yeah.
what is doing to the how the Bolsheviks actually picked up some of Marx's text and completely twisted it. And he is the expert in the room on that. And you have the other guy saying, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll respect your opinion, but you do need to respect ours." And I'm thinking, "Yeah, but you are not the specialist." So it goes back to what we were saying before of like the lack of how can I put it? You have a specialist in the room, and you still think that your opinion is as valid as that person. So yeah, it is once again very much not. I'm sorry, you go. Like,
No,
what is Nico your favorite scene of the film?
I will say, but when I was watching that scene, I was like, Raphael is gonna get a kick out of this one.
Yes, I did. I did.
That makes me happy. I have like just like honorable mentions, I do really much love the opening and the ending, just like the use of newsreel footage, which he also employs in The Brutalist. I think here to greater effect in a way of just highlighting the horror of the war and what happened afterwards, just contextualizing everything, especially halfway through when they actually reach Versailles and the Hall of Mirrors. You have the footage of them signing the treaty in that beautiful, beautiful room. The ending, of course, because it's the ending of the film. It's unforgettable. But it's actually like my favorite moment rewatching it. It's one that you mentioned during the conversation, which is when Mona gets fired. Just that entire sequence is grueling. She's begging. The mother is vicious and cold. She tells the kid that Mona won't be there anymore, and the kid just screams. Like, hats off to Tom Sweet, Tom Sweet, um, because he hasn't done much since, which is a shame because just here is such a challenging role, and he pulls it off flawlessly. But then the final line of Mona when she gets fired, and she says something like, "I will, I will spend the rest of my life wanting to ruin your family." It's just ouch, ouch. Amazing, amazing, amazing moment. But this is it then for this episode of Anatomy of Adaptation. Thank you once again, Rafael, for joining me. Where can our listeners hear your voice if they speak Portuguese or read your writing if they use Google Translate?
Yes, if you Google Translate, they can yeah, they can follow me on what we do on Fio Condutor if they read Portuguese or they want to use the Google Translate stuff. I've noticed that I always forget to pump up my Instagram where I mostly complain about Portuguese politics, the situation in Palestine, or my hate towards some kind of film news at some point. I usually
And good
just
music recommendations.
and I think good music recommendations. I do that, and again, it's a beautiful time because at time of recording we're almost in the day of the opening of the new Black Country New Road album, which is a beautiful day it will be, and it ties up very well with this Scott Walker thing again. But yeah, they can find me at RJR Felix, both in Letterbox and Instagram, and I'm pretty sure my Twitter is also that. But I'll tell you, and I think it's very much in case in question here. I spent 20 minutes of my day on Twitter like 2 days ago, and I wanted to die. I wanted the world feels so absolutely hopeless on my algorithm that I really, really, really questioned my own existence. So yeah, Instagram and Letterboxd are better places. And now, weirdly enough, I'm becoming very accustomed to being in this very own podcast as well.
Love having you here, and yeah, we have many, many more compelling, interesting, and honestly, yeah, there are more positive episodes to talk about more books
I
and
don't know if
films.
the next one is one of those though. I've not seen the film in a while, but
Less totalitarianism, less
less
fascism,
to
so
tell it's
more
more
existential,
yeah,
more lonely and romantic in a way, maybe.
more lonely and romantic. Let's put it like that. It's not as nihilistic. It's not
It's not as nihilistic. It
yeah.
is not.
Let's put it like
Um,
that. The Polish are known for being very positive, as you know.
Meanwhile, you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at NikiGrind97, also on Letterboxd, just look for Nicolo Grasso. And you can follow this pod on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod. Stay tuned and follow us because in 2 weeks' time, I'll be back joined by a good guest, old guest of the podcast, to talk about Ian Fleming's Casino Royale and the 1967 and 2006 James Bond films. Stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a fabulous day. Goodbye.